Did you know that 7-Eleven used to only sell one thing? The story behind how 7-Eleven became what it is today is downright brilliant, and it can help you and I with our personal financial journey. And that's going to be the focus of today's main topic. We're going to be discussing plans such as the baby steps that Dave Ramsey popularized and the financial order of operations that come from the Money Guys. We're not only going to compare those two, but we're going to cover the Hope-Filled Financial FootSteps, which is the plan that I wrote based off of both of the most popular plans that ever came out of Tennessee for your financial future. This episode is going to set up the entire year for the Hope-Filled Financial Podcast, and I can't wait to share it with you. Good morning and welcome to the Hope-Filled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Desberger, your one and only Hope-Filled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. I found a video on YouTube that we're going to be reacting to, basically just listening to the beginning part of it. It's from a Companies Explained series. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This video here is called 7-Eleven, the Accidental Company. Now, I don't know if accidental is the best descriptor, but you're going to find out why they call it that now.
In the 1920s, not many Americans had access to electricity. It was only those who lived in the affluent neighborhoods of major cities who did. And also, it was still early days for the refrigerator. So even among those who had access to electricity, not many had a refrigerator at home to keep their perishables fresh. But that does not mean people did not preserve perishables. There was a way to do it, and that was to use a block of ice put next to whatever needed to be preserved.
I'm curious, if you're around my age or younger, have you ever seen an actual ice box, the predecessor to the refrigerator? My parents have one. It's a family heirloom. We always called it Grandma's icebox.
So if, for example, you wanted the meat to last 3 days or a week, you had to pack it together with ice. Do you know what this way of preserving food did? It created a demand for ice, which fortunately could be bought from ice shops nearby. In the city of Dallas, Texas, selling ice was a big business, as was the case around the country. Perhaps to increase efficiency and cut costs, in 1927 several ice shops in the city merged to form Southland Ice Company.
In today's day and age, can you imagine what the world was like when there was a huge consumer need for ice?
Given the need to quickly move the ice from the storage at the store to the consumer homes, the ice stores were mostly close to or in residential areas. One employee of the Southland Ice Company, who's been identified as Uncle Johnny, Jefferson Green, identified a need in the customers he was serving. They needed items like milk, eggs, and bread when the grocery stores around were closed. He talked to his employer, one Joe C. Thompson Jr., about the possibility of selling milk, eggs, bread, and other items at the ice shop. With permission from his employer, Uncle Johnny stocked these items.
I might be just misremembering it, might be my memory playing tricks on me, and it might just be a simplified omission from this video. But I believe the Southland Ice Company did two things to diversify its products, if you will. It goes from just selling ice and distributing ice to consumers to what I recall as becoming a place where people could actually store stuff. Say they didn't have enough room in their icebox, or they had large perishable items that couldn't fit in their residential icebox. Well, they've got these little stores spread out near residential areas for distribution purposes, and it's filled with ice. Well, why not just preserve some food there? I recall that they basically kind of became a refrigerator storage unit for people's excess perishables or large perishables. And while they were doing that, well, they started stocking their own and selling things.
And soon, people were buying, especially during the weekends and holidays when most of the shops around were closed. Noticing the success, Joe C. Thompson Jr. decided to replicate this enterprise in the other ice shops around town. Business was booming, and the new venture was generating more revenue than ice blocks. And guess what? This turned out to be the survival path for Southland Ice Company. In the following few years, more Americans had access to both electricity and refrigerators and did not need to buy ice blocks to preserve their perishables. If ice blocks remained their primary product, they would most likely have closed down sooner or later.
And that's where we're going to stop this video today, even though I think the rest of the history that's explained here is full of a lot of interesting and surprising twists and turns as 7-Eleven goes from the Southland Ice Company to 7-Eleven. One of the really interesting twists is how 7-Eleven's name described the original operating hours after it was no longer called Southland Ice Company. In fact, it was named Totem in Between. There's some fun stuff about that, but it was open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Those were the operating hours for 7-Eleven. Even though it's open now basically 24/7, the name has stuck for years and years and years since then. I think that's very cool. So what can we learn from this story? Well, what happened if Southland Ice Company kept all their eggs in one ice basket? They eventually would have become unneeded because of the refrigerator entirely. But instead, they diversified the resource that they already had, storing ice, and capitalized on their ability to, with very little additional cost, store perishables for other people, or store perishables that could be sold when the alternative for the supermarket, the grocery store, was closed. That's cool. They were able to change their plan and adapt to the refrigerator becoming mainstream. They were able to continue being successful as a company because they weren't so rigid on their one specialization, their one idea, their one plan that was, at the time, brilliant. Similarly, in our financial lives, we need to be looking at the different opportunities that are around us, the different financial products that develop, the way that tax laws change, the way that society changes, the way that culture changes. We need to look at the landscape of our financial world, of the economy, and be able to adapt our plan, recognize where universal truths are universal truths and they're going to hold for long periods of time, and where something is relative to the environment that we're in, relative to the bits and pieces of the economy that are outside of our control. There are some parts of financial planning that simply need to be updated as circumstances change. And that's going to be the focus in the main topic. And with that said, let's jump into today's main topic. So here's what we're going to do for today's main topic. We're going to go through Dave Ramsey's baby steps because, well, they're the ones that I grew up learning. The baby steps are the plan that I wanted to follow, the ones that I felt like I was going to follow for the rest of my life, the ones that I thought conformed to universal financial truths as a kid because they were the only thing that I knew. And we're going to also talk about the Money Guys. The Money Guys are neighbors to Dave Ramsey, basically. Brian and Bo have done an excellent job putting together a, for lack of a better term, competing plan that's 9 steps. They call them the financial order of operations. And I want to kind of compare and contrast the two. There's some universal truth and spirit that can be similar between the two. And I want to recognize where there are trade-offs between the plans, why there are trade-offs, so that we can ask ourselves. I can ask myself with my plan, with the Hope-Filled Financial FootSteps, and you can ask yourself in your situation, what plan is going to work for me? So to finish out our little roadmap here, we're going to go through the baby steps, we're going to go through the financial order of operations, and then we're going to go through the Hope-Filled Financial FootSteps. And I want you to know that it is an excellent idea to look at multiple plans. Don't just pigeonhole yourself into one plan that someone says, this is it, because there's so much that we can learn from other people's idea of what personal finance ideally can be it Dave Ramsey, the Money Guys, me, or somebody else. And I think the only frugal way, the only prudent way to come up with the best plan for our own personal financial situations is to look at a variety of resources. Okay, Dave Ramsey's baby step number 1 is save $1,000. He calls this the beginner emergency fund or the starter emergency fund. And I think back when Dave Ramsey started the baby steps, that was still $1,000. Dave Ramsey has received criticism that $1,000 is inadequate as an emergency fund, for a starter emergency fund, because it's not enough. So let's get real here. What are the underlying goals behind Dave Ramsey's baby step 1? What's the intention? And let's talk about if changing it holds on to those same intentions, if those intentions are true. The first one is going to be to give you an easy win, a quick win. It is an intentional, which is frugal, an intentional first step to make a decision to start along a journey, start along a path. I think the $1,000 embodies that, whether you change it or not. The other part, and this is the thing that I think dictates the first baby step needs updated, is it's supposed to stay away the quote-unquote ankle biters that might hamper your get-out-of-debt journey. Dave Ramsey's best known for the next step, which is going to be paying off all of your debt, smallest to largest. We'll get there. But as you're paying off debt, let's say an emergency happens. Let's say you've got kids, and a kid breaks an arm, and you got to go to the ER. $1,000 isn't going to cover that ER bill. So in the spirit of keeping the ankle biters away, perhaps $1,000 isn't enough for that. I think we need to understand what is enough to keep the ankle biters away in our individual circumstances. And that's not going to be a flat number for everybody. Okay, baby step number 2 is the one that Dave Ramsey's most famous for. He says to pay off all of your consumer debt except the mortgage. List them smallest to largest in balance. Don't worry about the interest rates and just pay them off. Minimum payments on everything except the little guy. Pay everything you can into it. And then as you pay off those debts, the smallest ones, well, you freed up a little bit of a minimum payment that can be rolled into the next one. Now, this stems from Dave Ramsey taking a biblical approach to money. His verse, Proverbs 22:7, says, as he quotes it, "The borrower is slave to the lender." The Bible verse, as I know it, in my translation, is the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower becomes the slave to the lender. Now, in my opinion, straight up means that if you are in debt, you are a slave to the people you owe the money to. Becomes is a little bit more of a process. If you continue to pursue borrowing money, you can find yourself in a place where you are beholden to your lender. And I think there are consumer debts that can really hold us back, restrict our degrees of freedom, our decision-making with our money. I think that is why debt is really a bad idea. I think it doesn't conform nicely to frugality in that sense because it's not efficient if we're paying interest. So let's talk about step number 3. Step number 3 right here is going to be save 3 to 6 months of expenses in your emergency fund. Now, here is the first baby step that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to make our own decision. Our fully funded emergency fund can fall anywhere in that 3 to 6 month range, depending on our personal circumstances. And if you're not confident as to where you fall on the 3 to 6 months for your fully funded emergency fund, that might be a good sign that you could benefit from working with a certified financial planner, a financial advisor, or a financial coach. Baby step 4 is where Dave Ramsey starts to bring up investing. Now, there is something somewhere in between called baby step 3B. That's where Dave Ramsey describes saving up for a down payment. It used to be back in the day. Dave always said you needed a 20% down payment to avoid PMI. As homes got more and more expensive, though, Dave has changed this advice to 5 to 10%, really leaning into the 10% for a first-time home purchase. And for homes thereafter, Dave says really try to stick around that 20% down payment at a minimum. And up to this point, Dave also says you want to avoid any and all retirement investing, any and all taxable brokerage investing, not even your employer match. Dave says you want to focus everything on the getting out of debt stuff. And I appreciate the principled approach to just zeroing in on one focus at a time, doing steps 1, 2, 3, then 4 in order, one solid focus without trying to multitask too much. So let's talk about this. 15% of your income goes to retirement. The spirit of baby step 4 is going to be investing for retirement and start pouring money in there so that you can retire with dignity. Baby step number 5 here is somewhat optional because if you don't have kids, you don't have to save for their college, right? And even if you do have kids, Dave Ramsey, I believe, gives you the wiggle room to say, when it comes to college, they're on their own. Or, I don't believe in higher education. I think Dave still likes the idea of college. So he might say you can skip this if it doesn't conform to your values or what you want for your kids. Baby step 6 is interesting, and it's one that I asked about when I called the Dave Ramsey Show last. It's going to be paying off your house and paying it off early. Dave Ramsey says once you hit baby step 4, you do 4, 5, and 6 kind of concurrently. So you're still investing 15% of your income toward retirement. But once step 5 is covered or skipped, well, think about getting rid of your mortgage because your mortgage is still a debt. Borrower is slave to the lender. The Dave Ramsey philosophy says, get that thing out of here. I don't want it anymore. Baby step 7 gives us a little bit more room for freedom of decision. Build wealth and give. This is where Dave Ramsey will tell you if you don't have enough that you've been investing for retirement, with your mortgage completely gone, start pouring a whole bunch of money into retirement and build wealth using the tax benefited accounts that exist to you. Start building wealth in the way you want to build wealth. If you have a dream of doing real estate or starting a business, this is where that lives. And outrageous generosity lives here. Dave is a huge proponent of generosity, of tithing, of giving throughout the whole of this plan. However, when it comes to the build wealth and give step 7, he wants you to turn that generosity up to a place where it couldn't have otherwise been if you weren't financially free, if you didn't have financial peace. So that right there is a summary of the baby steps. Now let's talk about the financial order of operations from the Money Guys and how it might compare. I'm going to do my best to go through these a little faster. Number 1 is similar to baby step number 1. So I'm going to call it order of operation 1, cover your deductibles. And in listening to the Money Guys and following them for a few years, this operation's goal is to make sure that when it comes to your insurance, you list out all the insurance you have and you find the one with the highest deductible. It's probably going to be your medical insurance, just in my experience. You want to make sure you at least have that much in savings so that if there's an emergency that year for anything that you're deferring excess risk to that you can't take on, to an insurance company, that you can cover your part. The deductible is the part that you're responsible for. If you have a very high deductible health insurance plan, you might not be deferring enough risk to the insurance company. I know your premium will go up if you lower your deductible, but at some point you have to say, my highest deductible is so high, it's going to take me forever to save up that high. So that's going to be financial order of operation number 1. And I love the spirit here being, let's prudently make sure that we are protecting ourselves so that an emergency, a catastrophe, if you will, does not stop us on our wealth building journey. Number 2, and this one is the first huge deviation, in my opinion, from the Dave Ramsey baby steps, and that is go ahead and get your employer match right now. After you have a security blanket around you, go and get your match. Now let's talk about the spirit behind this. There's free money on the table, and time is never going to be more on your side than it is today. Dave Ramsey says, wait until you have a fully funded emergency fund in order to go tackle the investing. And the spirit behind it is one that you need to be aware of regardless of which way you decide to go with your personal financial journey. One is your emergency fund is sort of the protection that prevents you from needing to tap into your invested money that's dedicated to retirement for something that's an emergency. You could lean on debt. You could, if something came up, you could go take out debt. But both of these plans have a get out of debt element to them, especially when it comes to high interest consumer debt. So Dave Ramsey's going to be, well, make sure that you have a buffer to protect you from it. And anything that is going to be worse than 3 to 6 months of expenses should be taken care of by insurance. And I'm sure the Money Guys plan revolves around that same spirit. That's why they want you to have your deductibles covered here. But there might be a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a window where there's a catastrophe that doesn't get picked up by insurance, needs some more money, and you don't have enough savings to take care of it. And you need to be very thoughtful, reflective, and prudent when it comes to trying to decide, should I be trying to get the free money in my match? If there is too much of a window right now that I'm not able to cover in a financial catastrophe. It's a little bit of a catch-22 because both plans say that you need a little bit of a starter emergency fund before you pay off debt, but you don't fill it all up until your debt-free journey starts. And some of us have a match, some of us don't. These are the nuances that we really need to think about when we're discerning the best plan for us. If you have any thoughts on this, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Speaking of the debt payoff element of the plans, order of operation number 3 is going to be pay off your high interest debt. Now, it's really interesting. They, in the financial order of operations, separate debt from high interest and low interest. Low interest most likely being the mortgage. That's like the number one example, but I'm sure you could put some other ones over there. And the high interest ones, go here. Get rid of the high interest debts. They're too much of a risk to your world. You got to stop adding to them. So if you're using credit cards and carrying a balance, I'm pretty sure the Money Guys would tell you to stop doing that if you can't use them responsibly. And in Caleb Hammer's words, you might not be a credit card person, so stop. So here, they say pay off your high interest debt. Does that mean use the avalanche or the snowball? I'm not enough of a Money Guy follower to know, but my interpretation of this plan leaves me to believe that they give you the freedom to choose which one's going to best fit you. And indeed, some of us out here, some of you listening, are probably hyper analytical when it comes to the math stuff, and your payoff journey for debt needs to be mathematically efficient for you to be motivated to it. So the avalanche probably works well for you, even though statistically for most people, you're going to be more likely to finish the endeavor using the snowball. Okay, Order of operation number 4, they say emergency reserves, and they don't tell you 3 to 6 months specifically here. Listening to the Money Guys recently, they talk about in your accumulation phase, 3 to 6 months is probably pretty standard. It's probably pretty good. But as you get toward retirement, you might want to bump it up closer to a year's worth of expenses. And that comes from their certified financial planning background, where they're looking at bucket strategies and ways to keep you wealthy, some sort of nuance that you might not find over in the baby steps plan. It's quite possible that you're someone who's in such a high risk situation during your accumulation phase that you need more than 6 months in order to feel safe and content and to be genuinely deferring risk that can't be deferred in another way. Next, the Money Guys talk about in order of operation number 5, maximize your HSAs and Roth contributions. So get those rolling. And this is part of what the baby step number 4 would be about. Only they bring up the HSAs. When Dave Ramsey came up with the baby steps, HSAs weren't quite a thing, so they're not part of the baby steps. Dave is a proponent of HSAs, though. He likes them. Where they fit in the baby steps is somewhat nuanced. Order of operation number 6 is going to continue where baby step 4 is, and that's going to be max out your retirement. Now that might seem downright ridiculous, because if you have an employer plan that you can contribute to, the limit, I think for an individual, is over 20 grand here in 2024. It's insane. So are you going to be able to contribute that much? Well, the Money Guys recognize that some of us don't have massively high incomes. So they cap out your overall savings rate, not investment rate, but overall savings rate at around 25%. Now, a lot of that is probably investments, because it's going to include your Roth and HSA stuff, your 25%. It's going to include your retirement, and it's also going to include step number 7 here. Order of operation number 7 is hyperaccumulation, and as a part of your 25%, they're going to be talking about basically investing here in brokerage accounts. If you are on track looking at your retirement plan, that you're going to be able to retire ahead of 59 and a half. Well, if you want to retire ahead of 59 and a half and you can't access your retirement monies until that point, you're going to need some sort of taxable account to bridge when you can retire to then. And the other thing that they talk about is you have different tax buckets. You have taxable, you have tax deferred, and you have tax free, the Roth kind of thing. Make sure that you're balancing the buckets according to your strategy and the plan that you've developed with a certified financial planner, so that when you hit retirement, you have options. You have degrees of freedom to make decisions that you might not otherwise if you only went with one method for investing. Okay, let's talk about order of operation number 8. This is going to be prepaid future expenses. If you can see the video, there's a little graduation hat, but they're not so rigid into saying that this is just saving for future kids' college stuff. This could very well be buying a rental property or pursuing starting a business. I believe that's the spirit that the Money Guys are putting into order of operation number 8. And the last one they have on here is number 9, and that's going to be pay off your low interest debt. And I believe the Money Guys agree that you want to have your home paid off by the time you retire. It's probably a good idea. But they also recognize that, especially with like the 2.5% interest rates, the 2% interest rates that we had on mortgages because of the pandemic, that there is an arbitrage opportunity that can be had if you have a mortgage and you have the cash to pay off the mortgage, but it's making 4.5% in a high yield savings account. It feels mathematically awkward to take that money and pay off the mortgage today. Now, that's not to say that it would be wrong to do that. Dave Ramsey would definitely be a proponent of that in the baby steps. You know, that is a personal behavioral / financial peace choice to make. If you can sleep better at night knowing that the roof over your head is yours, it's paid for. So we've covered the 7 baby steps and we covered the 9 orders of operation. What we're going to do now is look at the 8 hope-filled financial footsteps, your hope-filled financial footsteps. These are the ones that I wrote. They're very much so derivative of the spirit that Dave puts into the baby steps, but I want to make sure that they adapt as technology and time has changed from 30 years ago so that they best fit your circumstances. I want to make sure that they give you the freedom to make your personal financial plan yours, because your circumstances are going to be different than the last client that I talked to. Your behavior, your relationship with money is going to be different than that of my own. And you need to be able to know yourself, know your circumstances, and know financial wisdoms in a way that you can outline something that is uniquely yours. Now, that's not to say that the Hope-Filled Financial Footsteps are just loose guidelines that really don't actually hold any weight.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
We need to know that there's a balance here. Okay, as a recovering Dave Ramsey apologist, how have I written an 8-step process that is uniquely yours, your Hope-Filled Financial Footsteps? First is going to be basically doing what Dave says, get a starter emergency fund, but I'm not going to be rigid in saying that it has to be $1,000. For your circumstances, for the emergencies that you've had to stay off in the last 6 months to a year, if you were to look back, how much money do you need to prevent yourself from going back in debt if that kind of thing were to happen to you again? This might be in and around 1 month's worth of expenses. And you can definitely take some of the wisdom from the order of operations and say, all right, what are my deductibles when it comes to my insurance? What's my highest one? Is my starter emergency fund going to be able to cover me on that? And if not, if you want to stop short of that so that you can get moving on the next steps, well, you need to say, am I willing to take on that little gap between my savings and the deductible as additional debt that I'd need to incur in the case of an emergency? And recognize you might not be able to get that little bit of debt depending on the kind of emergency. It's not a circumstance that I like at all, not having your deductible saved up. I really appreciate the Money Guy's wisdom there. Okay, real quick story on the high deductible stuff. I had a health plan that had just like the most ridiculously high deductible. And it was specific per person, even on a family plan. So my wife and I were on it right after we got married, right? And the deductible was almost $15,000 per person. That was in network. The deductibles doubled if you're out of network. I don't think that is a reasonable starter emergency fund, for example. That's way too much. Thank goodness we don't have that plan anymore. But I write it out here as save $1,000 to $4,000 as fast as possible. And when I say fast, I mean really fast. I mean, if you can do this in a week or two, get her done. Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 2 is called Take Control. So the insurance thing is one part. Don't get caught up too much in the weeds. You should already have insurance in place, but you can review what insurance you have and try to figure out if you have anything that's redundant that you don't need. You can try to shop around and see if you can get your premiums a little bit lower. Okay, other things that live here in this Take Control step. I think that you need to be able to write down your plan for your money if you're going to be able to control it. Writing your plan down is a scientifically proven way, we talked about it on the first episode this year, to improve the odds that you actually stick to a plan. That's why having a budget is super valuable. I highly recommend that you go back to the episodes where I covered budgeting in depth if you're just starting your budgeting journey. If we're trying to get out of consumer debt, we need to stop adding more to it. If you have credit cards and you are carrying a balance on them, I'm not going to tell you to go cut them up right now, but at the very least, go get yourself a little Tupperware, fill it halfway up with water, throw the credit cards in and pop that sucker in the freezer. That way you're not tempted to use them anymore, and delete the memory that you have on your phone and your computer and the commerce sites that are connected to those cards. You're just not going to use them anymore. And lastly, for this one, don't go alone. If you're married, make sure your spouse is on board with you. You cannot go on this journey for hope-filled financial success without being arm in arm with your spouse. And if you're single, make sure that you have someone in your life who you can talk to about this. It could be a financial coach. It could be a best friend. It has to be someone, though, that you're comfortable with showing your financial plan and talking about it. Like you can pop in and out of each other's lives and say, hey, I know that around this time you're going to be moving on to Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 3. Why haven't you gotten there yet? And so that's what we're going to do now. Debt freedom. And this is very, very similar to baby step number 2. I believe in using the debt snowball method, but I'm not going to yell at you if you do the avalanche, if that's the kind of thing that is going to make you more motivated to pay off debt. Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 4 is going to be fill your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses. And it can very well be different for you. I think that is good conventional wisdom. And as part of this, make sure that you update your insurance deductibles. If you can now afford a higher deductible plan in order to get your premiums down, free up some more of your income. And if you need a little bit more to feel comfortable, well, you can go a little bit higher. You don't want to have so much of an emergency fund that you're sidelining money that could otherwise be growing. Because when it comes to emergency funds, we don't want them invested in a place where they could go down in value and put us at high risk. We can't afford to have our emergency fund invested. And we can't afford to have so much sitting in the emergency fund that we're sacrificing our hope-filled financial future because too much money isn't growing. As we move on to Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 5, there's a question: should I be getting my employer match, like they say in the financial order of operations, leading up to that point, or should I wait until after I'm debt-free? And I think that's going to heavily depend on your individual circumstances and the timing of everything. I think you should look at what the timeline would be with one set of plans where you don't get the match, and one should be where you are getting the match. See how much of a delay there is. Does it change your world? And does by skipping your employer match put you at a place where it's going to be a lot harder to save up in Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 5 to make your retirement dreams a reality? I think we can all take the step to critically look at this. And if we can't do it on our own, look at it with an expert and decide for ourselves whether we should be getting a match or if we need to really be pouring everything we can into our debt payoff journey and saving up that fully funded emergency fund first. So let's talk about this one. Dave Ramsey says save 15% of your income. The Money Guys say save 25%. Dave Ramsey's 15 is specific to retirement. The Money Guys' 25% includes HSAs and brokerage accounts. I'm going to say that there are a lot of different approaches out there to securing your financial future, to securing retirement. I'm personally subscribed to the idea of coasting FI. I like the idea of getting a big enough lump sum that if later in life, as things get messy here in my 30s and 40s, if I have to slow down or stop contributing because of an emergency or things are just tight or I lose my job, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing my future retirement because of it. I know the nest egg that I have in there is going to be able to continue growing enough that I can retire with dignity and in around 60 years old, give or take 5 years. But that involves saving up a lot of money really young and way exceeding 15%, maybe even exceeding 25% in order to hit that point. And that might not be a good plan for you. You may not like the idea of coasting FI. You might want to have something that's more of a fixed number with a little bit of a safety factor in it. But how much you need to save in order to retire is going to be heavily dependent on not only your income, but your age. So you need to look at your circumstances and do some projections. Start talking with a financial coach or a financial advisor and figure out how much do I need to be saving each month right now in order to retire when I want to retire? And is that going to be feasible? That plan is going to be so specific to your circumstances. I cannot, in good faith, subscribe to a flat percentage and say, yep, just do this. I think you need to understand that getting started investing as soon as possible is a priority first and foremost, not to get paralysis of the analysis when it comes to this, but also know that you need to understand how much is going to be enough, how much you need to be putting in there in order to make it enough. This is why I raised such a stink over the Dave Ramsey 8% safe withdrawal rate thing, because we got to be able to start with the end in mind. We got to know, what is my retirement number? How much money do I need to retire, and how much do I need to be investing right now in order to make it happen? And do I want to hit that number early for the sake of coasting FI, or even fire, full fire, fat fire, lean fire, doesn't matter to me. What is your plan for securing your future? Figure that out and enact it in Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 5. Okay, next I call 401 Kid. I'm a huge proponent of teaching kids how to save well with money. 401 Kid is basically offer a match to your children for savings goals that you approve of as an adult. I know that not everybody approves of higher education or thinks it's what they want to be doing for their kid. But if you have your future secured, you're on track, and you've got some discretionary income that you could be pumping into the kids' world, it could be like, for example, saving up so that they can really pour their heart and soul into some competitive sports more so than they otherwise could have. But I like the idea of them having some skin in the game. If they're old enough to work and earn money, give them a match. Give them an opportunity to save. You're saving up for a car, college, sport, some sort of major goal that you think is awesome for them. Say, I will match you, but give it a limit. Goodness me, please give it a limit. There's a lot more to be said about 401 Kid, Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 6, but I'm going to save that for an episode specifically on it later this year. Okay, let's talk about number 7. This is where things might get a little bit more controversial again when it comes to when do you pay your mortgage off. Baby step 6 was pay off your mortgage early. Order of operation number 9 was pay off your low interest debt. So how do you make decisions in and around when you pay off the mortgage? Well, I think it definitely comes after step number 5, where you know that your future, your retirement, your plan is secured and you are moving in the direction of being able to retire with dignity. When it comes to retiring with dignity, we can retire with a much smaller nest egg if we don't have a mortgage over our head, because a mortgage represents a huge portion of our burn rate. By all means, I'd say the thing I'd be more strict about is pay off your mortgage before you retire. And if you want to pay it off before then, regardless of the arbitrage opportunity there, I think that's a decision that you can make on your own. I'm going to cover this more specifically on an episode fully dedicated to Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 7. So please like, follow, share, and subscribe if you don't want to miss it. And that takes us to the final Hope-Filled Financial Footstep, which is live and give the dream. And I'm not going to say build wealth, because not everyone's dream is to die with the most money. It's not to pour a massive amount into our retirement funds so that we have a big pool of generational wealth to pass down or spend in retirement. That's a decision you make back up in number 5. Right now, 8 is your dream. I mentioned the book before, Your Money or Your Life. Asks a great question. If you didn't have to work for money, what would you do? If you were financially independent, what would you do? And that's going to be step number 8 here. Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 8 is hitting that dream of financial independence and pursuing the thing we would do if we didn't have to work for money. That could very well be continuing with the job or the career you have now if you love it and you don't want to leave it. That can be your dream. That's awesome if you want to do that. It could be starting your own business. It could be getting into real estate. It could be starting a hobby. It could be getting a vacation home and spending a lot of time with family and taking them on some awesome vacations if you have kids and grandkids. You heard me mention it when talking about the retirement stuff. You heard me talk about it when I called Dave Ramsey Show. I think it's best to start any plan with the end in mind and to not invest into any plan that you don't understand. Before you start on the plan, I want you to have a good vision in extreme detail of what that dream is. If you didn't have to work for money, what would you be doing right now? It should be written. It should be written under your Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 8 is the goal that you're striving for. And when you write that down, you can backtrack and write down the specific parts of all 8 steps that are particular to you, that make them yours, and have a guided plan with steps that have the spirit of what works really well from the baby steps and wisdom gleaned from the financial order of operations to live out your hope-filled financial future. These steps are going to be the structure for the whole of the year for this podcast. I'm going to be going into each one of these in more depth and covering topics in and around each of these footsteps as we go through the year. If you made it to the end, please consider following or subscribing so that you can join us on that journey. Please consider following this plan with me as we move through 2024 and beyond. And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.